Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another lesson in class. This is lesson 28. You cannot fight with a dull weapon. So let's get into it. All right. What do I mean by this? Well, if whatever you're using is your weapon, whether that is your words, a stick, a knife, a gun, a rock, so on and so forth, if it's not functional, if the sword is not sharp, it will not cut. If your words are not precise, it will not pierce through to the heart. So, think of it like a car, right? If your car doesn't have proper maintenance done to it, how can you afford to operate it, right? You can't, you're going to spend money on a useless car. No, you want it to operate correctly, whether that's a gasket issue, a belt issue, whatever the case may be, right? So you have to think of your weapon just like a part of you, right? So in the military, we have something that we go through. It's a DITY, weapon, body, gear, so on and so forth. And you want to make sure that all those things are functioning correctly. Is your body functioning correctly? Is your weapon functioning correctly? Is your gear functioning correctly? So on and so forth, because technology fails, right? And then, of course, if your tech fails or if your gear doesn't work, so on and so forth, and your life preserver, how do you use other things, right? We have a saying in martial arts, one mind, any weapon. Now, if you don't understand that, we're going to probably tap into this, a little bit in this lesson. So in business life, what matters, right? If you ever seen the new movie, I don't think it was said in the first original Karate Kid, but the one with Jackie Chan where he talks to Jaden Smith and he says, everything is Kung Fu, right? Now, growing up, I was highly, active in things like that. And there were three areas that I mainly focused on: chess, martial arts, and magic. Mainly sleight of hand and mentalism. In martial arts, it was mostly striking. I remember joining a wrestling team and getting in trouble for fighting on my back. I didn't know that going on your back was a bad thing. It conserves energy, so on and so forth. I lost the match, but the person was passed out. So did I win? If it was a real life thing, yes. If it was for sport, no, I didn't, right? And then, of course, Coach Hedden came over to me, my high school wrestling coach, said, if you ever do that jujitsu martial art crap here again, I'll have you off the wrestling team. And I said, okay. So, you have to understand not only in your environment, but what tools are you working with, all right? So, sorry, it's a little windy. I wanted to hold down these pages here. So let's talk about martial arts, right? In Bruce Lee's style of martial arts, or in Wing Chun, if you've seen the movie Ip Man, they have something called the sticky hands drill. Now, the sticky hands drill is pretty much, if you think like you're holding onto a steering wheel, right? And you would put your hands, with somebody else's, and you would do this thing like this, and you would be focusing on sensitivity and trying to feel when the other person is moving, right? Similar to, jujitsu or wrestling. You want to know where the person is going. And so therefore, over time, with experience, you can anticipate, I felt this twitch, I felt that move, I felt this, and then you know where to go, right? Now, if you could practice on your own, let's say you have a steering wheel or whatever, or like one of those exercise things that you put between your legs and you squeeze them together, and you can put your hands inside and it shows you where your hands should be, because in boxing or whatever, your hands are supposed to be up in a fight. You stick out your thumbs, you touch your eyebrows, and that's the distance where you can go ahead and or should be the distance of where your hands should be, depending on how you fight, so on and so forth. The sticky hands drill also comes into what's known as trapping. So if somebody goes to throw a punch and we make contact because I blocked, now that puts me in the perfect position for what you've been training for with the sticky hands drill, right? So these are all ways to sharpen your tools and arsenal. Let's say you're a poet, but your vocabulary is not as diverse as others. You're going to use very basic rudimentary words, right? Or as they say, elementary, from Sherlock Holmes, words that will not be as specific as they should be when you're trying to make a point. It's like working with AI. You want this, so on and so forth, you get an answer, but it's not the best answer, so on and so forth. So you have to be versatile with your vocabulary. I mean, if you ever seen, I think it's called Deaf Poetry with Mos Def, or if you ever grew up in the hip hop community, there's something called a cipher, and people will go around and they'll freestyle, so on and so forth, and they'll use their words, they'll use other people's words, etc. You've probably seen this in 8 Mile, where they have the freestyle battle, so on and so forth, right? Now, depending on where you grew up and how you grew up, you got exposed to different terminology, right? So, use that terminology, use that knowledge, use those martial arts skills, use whatever you know in business or for life to make you a dangerous person that's capable of being dangerous, as Jordan Peterson says, but you choose not to, right? Always stay ready. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready, right? Most people will wait till the last minute to get ready. They'll wait, they'll listen, they'll study, blah, blah, blah. And then they say, oh my God, we got a problem. Well, didn't you freaking pick up on all the clues? Or probably not, because you didn't watch Blue's Clues, right? That was during the time of Nickelodeon, where it was like, who was it? Face, where he would show up on the screen, peanut butter and bananas, so on and so forth. He would go FACE, that's face, and that's me, so on and so forth. Now they changed it to something else and they have Bluey and everything, so on and so forth. So this is what I mean, right? The breakdown first, right? And then how do I associate it to the rest of everything else in my life? Because the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. So think about that. Now let's move on to point 3. A fight is like a dance. And this is what I mean by using your words, right? If you speak to any fighter, if you speak to any poet, if you speak to any, I just call them aggressive poets, but rappers, so on and so forth, like Eminem, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, so on and so forth, Jay-Z, etc., they'll talk about a mind game and things like that. And the reason why there's a mind game is because, well, one of the first things you get taught is how to control your emotions during the pace of the dance or the fight, right? Nobody wants to dance with a bad dancer, right? And if you get frustrated, you're not even going to pay attention. You're not even going to want to dance anymore, right? And nobody wants that, right? Nobody wants to dance with an upset person. Nobody wants to fight, so on and so forth, somebody that's extremely calm, etc. It just makes them more upset. But that's the point of the mind game, because you cannot win a fight with a clouded mind, right? Anger blinds oneself, right? And this is taught by several practitioners of martial arts or any other fields. If you get upset, you're going to become blinded and you will not see everything else that's going on. Point 2. No one likes an offbeat dancer. Now, this is going back to the mental game, right? Yeah, if you grew up in, let's say, up north or in California or Chicago or whatever, where there is a mixed, diverse of people, and then you come to, I don't know, bumfuck Egypt or wherever the case may be, or the South or whatever. Well, they could dance in Atlanta, so I take that back. North Carolina, South Carolina, I don't know, I haven't seen too much rhythm around there, but you can try to put in the effort, so on and so forth, right? However, if you're offbeat, nobody would really want to be around you. If they are around you, they're probably making fun of the way you dance because you're offbeat, meaning you're not moving to the rhythm of the music or the tempo or the musicality or the lyrics that are going on, right? Because you have to look at dancers as though their choreography is telling a story. Same thing in a fight situation, same thing with poetry, right? There's a rhythm with poetry, whether that's a haiku, a creative poem, so on and so forth, etc. If you're fighting, there is a cadence, there's a rhythm to the fight. And the best thing about this is, and I'm going to go back to Bruce Lee, most people don't understand that Bruce Lee was like a champion's cha-cha dancer or something like that. And the reason why he danced was because it helped him with his footwork. Remember, in a fight, you normally don't want to cross your feet because you can end up falling because it takes you off balance and it puts your weight in one position, right? And if you have your weight in all your weight in one spot, if you're balancing on one leg, think of it like that, someone can easily push you over or take advantage of that, right? If your vocabulary is not as precise as it should be, right, then you're going to have issues when it comes to, well, articulating what it is that you want to say, right? When it comes to being not just direct, but whom your audience is, right? People are normally afraid to be themselves because, well, if I'm myself, they might make fun of me. If I'm myself, they might not, the audience might go away. If I'm myself, so on and so forth, whatever the case may be. But here's the thing, Brene Brown talks about authenticity and being yourself. right? When you allow yourself to shine, you give others the ability to shine themselves, right? What is it? Coach Carter, the deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. However, we've been told over time that we are not capable. Why is that? And when we do try, yeah, there's going to be failures. I went to the gym today. I have a bum shoulder. I still did exercises, so on and so forth, and I pushed through the pain, right? I use my martial arts training, tell myself the pain is not there, even though after the workout, I definitely feel the pain sometimes. But, I pushed through it. I went to a chiropractor who fucked up my back, so on and so forth, and then didn't want to, oh, well, I can't take anything, blah, blah, blah. And granted, I wanted to beat the crap out of him just to return the favor. I walked away and I just kept, doing my own physical therapy. And yeah, he gave me a herniated disc because he proceeded to carry out things without doing his due diligence, like looking at x-rays. I already told him I had certain issues with my spine, etc. And he proceeded to do everything. I think he's part of something called the joint chiropractic or whatever, but that's a whole other case. Right? So think about it like that, right? When people want to take advantage of you, how are you best prepared yourself for when they attempt to take advantage of you, right? Now let's get into number 3. Why does rhythm matter, right? Rhythm matters because just as in life that moves with a specific pattern, right? You have seasons, right? This leads to anticipation, right? Here's summer, we're gonna spring, fall, then we're going to go to winter, then we're going to go to spring, then we're going to go to summer, and so you're able to anticipate, right? If you're doing salsa dancing, right, it's forward and backward, side to side, right? Or you have bachata, right, which is another style of Latin dancing, or the samba, or the waltz, so on and so forth. It's a slower pace, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then it's quick, quick, slow, right? Quick, quick, slow, quick, quick, slow. Right? And when you're starting off, you have to remember smooth is fast, right? And fast is smooth, if I remember that correctly. Slow is slow is smooth, and smooth is fast, right? So that's a thing that you probably hear in a movie. I got it from when we were on the rifle range, so on and so forth, because people normally will want to just get through and just let off rounds, so on and so forth, etc. But if you take your time, you breathe correctly, so on and so forth, and you push the trigger between breaths, you'll be able to be steady when you're lining up your shot, so on and so forth, and you'll be able to hit your target, whether that's 200, 300, or 500 meters or yards away. Right? And then you have to remember, and Bruce Lee also said this about a heavy bag, right? The heavy bag does not punch back. The target does not shoot back. So you may be confident at the range. You may be confident when you're punching the punching bag. But the moment, like Mike Tyson said, you get punched in the face, the plan goes out the window. And that's where you have to control your emotions, right? Because you could get caught off guard, right? Let's say you're trying to sneak up on somebody and you're playing a game and, you got this guy calling this guy and, oh, he's here. Oh, no, I saw him doing this, etc. Well, if you throw a wrench into their works and be like, well, that's nice, everybody's on camera anyways, who cares, right? Then who's the bigger man? Unless they're a snitch and they work for somebody, right? Because then, snitches get stitches, as they say, if you've seen Working Man. But that's a whole other thing that the daughter said to the dad. And it's a New York thing, I guess, or military, or anybody who's about that life. So, moving forward, right? There's always a leader and a follower within a fight, or within a dance, or within a cipher, so on and so forth, right? BET has a cipher with Eminem, Black Rob, and a couple other people, and you can see who's where, what position they're in, what role they play, etc. Same thing on the dance floor. When you're doing partner work, there's a leader to guide and there's one to follow, and you can trade off. Because if you have two leaders, right, too many chiefs, not enough Indians, right, concept, then what's going to happen is that think of it like a magnet. You have two things opposing each other, and now they're just pushing back, and now it just looks like a sloppy dance, or like they don't know what the hell they're doing, right? And the same thing in a fight. If you watch the UFC, the dominant fighter normally controls the center of the ring, keeping the person on the outside. This does a variety of things. The reason why they're on the outside is because, well, there's more distance, yes, but the person on the inside doesn't have to move that much to keep their eye on you, so on and so forth, etc. If you're on the outside, you have to move around, you have to dance, so on and so forth, etc. You have to use your footwork. And what does that do? That gasses you, right? That takes away your oxygen supply. And when you don't have breath in your lungs, or you're tired already, so on and so forth, you will get knocked out. Trust me, I've been knocked out. When I did martial arts and I tried to compete, I got knocked out 6 times in a row, and my coach was like, whoa, 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 whoa. We're going to stop right here. We're going to put you back into training, etc. And if you ever seen my buddy Mike Chastain, etc., he could tell you stories, when we were in high school, and he did martial arts too, etc. He worked with jiu-jitsu and all that stuff. I was more on the striking side, so it was a little bit different, right? But I always knew that to end a fight, I would rather, instead of being in a bad position, wrestling on the ground, brawling, so on and so forth, I wanted to end it very quickly. And that's what JKD and Wing Chun and Muay Thai and these styles brought to me, was that knowledge, right? What happens if they're this close? How do I fight like this? How do I use my elbow? How do I use my hand? You got to remember, there's about 30 or so little bones in your hand, so on and so forth. There's over 200 in your body. But in your hand, if you break any one of these little bones, right, that's the end of your hand. You can't use it anymore. So what other tools do you have in your toolbox when you're using your words, right? Because remember, if you take the S at the end of words and bring it to the front, it spells sword, right? So the power of life and death rests upon the tongue, etc., right? I try to tell people it's not a cross, it's a sword. Why do you think they had the Crusaders, so on and so forth, right? Or King Arthur, the sword and the stone. Peter, upon this rock I will build my church. Sword in stone, right? And there's the cross, there's a rock, so on and so forth. It's a whole metaphor and analogy. But if you put the pieces together, you can see what's going on. Most people don't understand the art part of things, right? So they look for things more scientifically, which is more logical, which is less creative, because it's not as replicatable like a Picasso painting or a Rembrandt or a Jackson Pollock, so on and so forth, etc. Right? Jackson Pollock made a lot of paintings, but one of the things he was known for was the splatter paintings, right? Because it was a uniqueness. You couldn't control where the paint landed. It was a variety of color, so on and so forth. So literally every painting was different from the other, and it prevented forgeries from happening, so on and so forth. What's one of the biggest things that are happening now with currency? People forge currency, whether it's digital or not. You could go to a freaking gas station, etc., and pick up a pre-card, so on and so forth. Or if you're, on the other shady side, if you work at a gas station or a restaurant, you swipe the card, and then of course after you get the information, you could put it on a hotel key, so on and so forth. And you put that in your wallet, and it doesn't look like anything else. It's just the same magnetic strip with the same amount of information and details. So if you learn to think outside of the box instead of being so focused within it, right? Feeling like a caged animal, right? Always on the defense, right? Think both offense and defense, right? Ip Man taught this to Bruce Lee, and being both offensive and defensive is a proper thing, right? Just like there's a leader and a follower. The leader may be offensive if they're pushing you, right? If you're dancing, right? And you're here and they push with their left hand and they guide, so on and so forth, or they push with their right arm, so on and so forth, and on your scapula or whatever, on the back of on your back. They're telling you to turn, right? That is a push. But if you push back, you're not going to turn. If you're wrestling, you feel this, right? If you're doing jiu-jitsu or whatever, if you're going at it, right? If you did Greco-Roman wrestling or college wrestling or high school wrestling, you get into the clinch, right? You tie up, etc. And then you try to push and pull and so on and so forth. Or sometimes you push with the anticipation that they're going to push back, and then you use that, like in Aikido, you use that momentum, that movement, and you go with the flow and you use their energy against them, so on and so forth. But if you're not sharpening your sword, right? Or if you're not sharpening your weapon because it's dull over time, right? The expression, if you don't use it, you lose it. Well, then you're going to probably lose, right? And then you're going to question and get frustrated and make up stuff. Oh, this person cheated. This person did that. This person, that wasn't creative. He must have got that from somewhere else, this, that, and the third. And you make up all these BS excuses. Oh, that stuff was written down, this, that, and the third. Yeah, I wrote some stuff down. However, what I just said, if you look at my notes, They're literally notes. These are bullet points. The rest is coming off the dome, and I haven't had any time to write out a damn novel for everybody. So this is why when people are trying to interpret certain things, especially because I grew up in different situations where I would do certain things, people would say, how did you do that? Because I was into magic and things like that. But then they would also think that I was trying to be sneaky, right? That told me where their mentality was, right? Always thinking negative, always thinking, not positive, not looking at the good side of things, but looking at the bad side of things, which tells me a lot about their upbringing, their behavior, where their mindset is, so on and so forth, right? I mean, I could get into it further, but we're going to stick to this because I want you guys to now sharpen your weapon, because you can't fight with a dull sword, right? Or a dull weapon, right? Now, to protect the center, what does this mean? Remember the UFC analogy, right? In the octagon, the person that's in the center of the ring is normally in control of the fight, wastes less energy, so on and so forth. But the same thing in fighting, right? All the vital organs are in the center of the body. So if you're able to take a punch, etc., on your shoulder, on the side, etc., yeah, they could slap you on the ear and do a percussion slap, knock off your equilibrium, so on and so forth, which keeps you upright. But hopefully you have your hands up. Right? But think about it. You hit someone in the nose, their eyes water. That's the end of the fight. You punch somebody in the mouth, right? That's a bad thing, right? You hit somebody in an off button on the chin because of the bundle of nerves that are there. That's an off switch. You hit somebody in the trachea or the throat, the esophagus. That's so another hit, right? You shoot somebody in the chest, right where the heart is, etc. You punch somebody in the diaphragm near the sternum, right? The little triangle point right there. You might give a nice swift uppercut, knocks off all the air. Sometimes they pass out. You kick someone in the groin, etc. They go down like a brick, right? Or, drop like a rock, as they say. So you have to understand that, okay, how do I control the center? Well, if you're doing things like speech and using your words, right, you have to control the attention, right? And the attention normally is whoever is, speaking the best, right? Who can control the center? Think of, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Jay-Z, Nas, etc. Or, I don't know, let's use a country singer. I'll use Garth Brooks again, or Gwen Stefani, whoever the case may be, Shakira, etc. If these people start to perform being authentic to whom they are and speaking originality, not using other people's words and terminology, yeah, it's okay to sample and be creative and do your own thing based off that. That's why they have called sample beats in music, etc. Do you mind if I use this line or use this later? Yeah, no problem. Just add your own creative twist, right? And even in the world of legality, when it comes to business, there's a thing called copyright infringement. So if you don't change at least 2 to 3 things about what was ever written down or said or whatever, or the piece of artwork, etc., it now becomes a forgery, or you fall into copyright infringement laws, which are a pain to deal with, right? Because you are not the original person behind the idea. And that's what IP is for, right? Intellectual property, so on and so forth. And if you think about it, and I think, you got Prince, Michael Jackson, and all these people that talk about the music industry. They keep their masters, etc. Yeah, they get a small cut, this, that, and the third, but they also get to keep profiting off of it. Think about how many songs you heard in TV shows or movies that were also sung by, or the same song was used in all these things that were written by these people and created by these people. Do you think that they get a lot of money from that? Probably not, right? They probably get pennies on the dollar, right? Which is probably why the 80-20 rule works so well, or Pareto principle. Yes, they preach in business the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of the people do majority of the work, and about 80% of the people don't, right? However, when it comes to getting paid out, they'll keep the 80% and pay you 20. Think about that for a minute, right? Right? You bust your butt, you do all this work, etc. Right? How much are they getting gas for? Right? How much are they selling it for? What are they getting from China? Right? How much does it cost over there? How much do they sell it for? How much does it cost to make a pair of Nikes? You could go look up a company or whatever that works with Nike that does something called white labeling. They make the same shoe. The Kardashians did it with makeup, right? They just had a brand attached to it that was unique to a certain demographic of people, right? And they were able to control their own center, i.e. their attention, right? So as long as they weren't stealing, right? That was one thing, right? Because if you're stealing, then you're cheating in the fight, or you're biting somebody else's words, or you're copying somebody else's stuff, right? They were able to control the sensor. Okay, I like that. How can I make that like this now, so that it fits your persona, whom you are, right, etc. It's okay, to replicate. Remember, emulation is the greatest form of flattery. So if I saw, let's say, I remember my little cousin Noah. He used to look up to me, and I remember one time he was on my back, and he's like, Mike, my birthday's in September, your birthday's in September, so that makes us brothers, right? And I just looked at it and say, yeah. And then I saw that he would, emulate some of the things that I did. And, it was a great form of flattery because it told me that that person looked up to me. I didn't take offense to it. Now, as I dealt with older people in the military, so on and so forth, there were people that I was teaching martial arts to. And I think I have a video around there somewhere. I think it's either on my Facebook or I could upload it or whatever, where I was doing gun defenses and things like that. And people would jump straight to the freaking thing, and I would get aggressive with my verbiage because, well, it's a life or death situation, and they were treating it like it was a game, right? And as DMX says when he talks, he's like, you think this is an effing game? And he's screaming, so on and so forth, right? So it's not a game when you're dealing with that situation, especially when you're dealing in other situations using words, right? Because some people hang on to words, right? Words can change someone's life. It could pick them up. It could bring tears, so on and so forth. That put together with music, now you have a track in a song that can move the world. But is it yours? And are you paying fair price for it? Probably not, right? Let's move forward. So just to recap before we move forward, when it comes to a fight is like a dance, whether that's business, life, poetry, wherever, right? Then you have to remember that you cannot be angry because anger blinds oneself in a negotiation, an argument, whatever. If you're in a relationship, the person that's more calm has more time and is not stressed out, so they have more time to think because the chemicals that get released when you're angry not only cloud the mind, it forces you to speed up and you make mistakes. If you remain calm, you'll start to understand instead of listening to respond. Remember Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Most people listen to respond, they don't listen to understand, right? They may watch or see certain things, but if that's all they see, then they didn't pay attention to lesson 27, right? Remember lesson 27? How to hear with your eyes, right? And then how to see with your ears, etc. Stay calm and you'll be able to do both, right? So the next one I touched on was no one likes an offbeat dancer. This is the mental game, right? You can look at Mike Tyson or Michael Jordan, so on and so forth. They would watch people's movements, etc., and then they would get into the other person's head, right? They would get into the other person's head and then get them upset, throws them off balance, knocks off their rhythm because, well, like I said earlier, the chemicals that get released, cloud the mind, etc., so on and so forth. Number 3, rhythm matters. The reason why rhythm matters is because if you're not moving with rhythm, now it's okay to have broken rhythm depending on where you are, right? Because it catches people off guard. If you're breakdancing and you're dancing to the beat and then all of a sudden you change to dancing to the lyrics or the musicality, not only is there a small twitch in the brain that makes people go, what was that? But it catches their focus once again, right? You got to think of it like a frame, and I learned that from somebody named Apollo Robbins, right? Everybody's focused normally within a small frame, and if you're able to control that frame, right, controlling the center, right, because your focal point is about the size of a quarter or $50, give or take. Everything outside of that is your peripheral vision, if I enunciated that correctly. So remember that. And then, of course, there's always a leader and a follower. But you have to understand what role or what position you're playing during the dance, during the duel, during the freestyle battle, in life, in business, so on and so forth, right? In the conversation within relationships, so on and so forth, right? Because how many people have heard, I feel like you hear me, but you don't understand me. Or I feel like you're listening to me, but you don't know what I want. And it's like, I'm not a mind reader. Like, please help me out here. And you're getting upset, but you're not trying to understand what's being said because maybe their vocabulary is limited. So maybe you could say, are you trying to say this? So on and so forth. Or let me understand, did you mean this to happen? And if you ask that question, it forces the other side to start asking themselves, well, it's either yes or no. And if it's a no, then they could fix their pattern, right? Their sentencing, their word, their verbiage, so on and so forth. And then they could come correct and say to you, oh no, what I meant was this. Okay, because for a second I thought you were, and not to be like crash or whatever rude with a tonality when you say, I thought this, or sarcastic, but it sounded like this to me, so on and so forth, etc. That's why I was asking, did you mean this? Because it was kind of confusing. And if you do it not with just not a smile on your face, but with a positive intent to genuinely try to understand them, as though you would try to understand children when they're trying to learn how to speak and things like that. I remember my little sister, she got upset one time and she goes, oh my God, I'm going to get disinhydrated. And I was like, I knew what she meant. What she meant to say was, I'm going to get dehydrated, but she couldn't pronunciate and enunciate the words. So she said disinhydrated because it just made sense to her. But we understood, and then quickly over time, she understood that it was to dehydrate, etc. So remember that, right? And so that's how you would control that situation when you're dealing, with switching positions, whether being the leader or the follower, and you could take turns doing so, right? You don't always have to lead. You can follow sometimes, right? But in order to lead, you must first follow. Remember that. And then, of course, protect the center, right? The center line through the body, all the vital organs, right? Protect yourself. Remember, weapon, body, gear, right? So is your weapon good, right? Why? Because your weapon's there to defend you, right? And to ward off anybody that comes around to try to test you. Your body, if you're not in shape, if you're unhealthy, look for answers. We live in a world with AI that passed the MCAT and the LSAT, which are the tests and exams needed in order to get into medical school and law school, that also has access to the internet. So ask it questions, tell it to become a doctor or a lawyer, and then bring that to an actual human doctor and an actual human lawyer to verify what it's saying, because, well, technology can lie sometimes, right? Or it could pull information, or ask it for resources or scholarly articles or journals so that they could do more research for you, right? And then you can read through that and maybe you'll get better, so on and so forth. Just maybe, right? God forbid people actually take the time to do so. I mean, it's right at your fingertips. People have no problem spending $1,600 on a damn iPhone that comes with, intelligence and all this other stuff, but they'll complain about investing $20 a month to use ChatGPT or Google Plus or whatever to make their life better. It boggles my mind, right? And then, of course, protecting the gear, right? Is your house in shape? Do you have a leaky roof? Does your car work? Is I don't know, your camel pack, right? If you're going on hikes, you have a camel pack. It's a bag that goes on your bag with a bladder in it that holds water, so on and so forth. Is that functioning correctly? Does it have mold in it? When you bought the house, did they do the inspection, or is there black mold, so on and so forth? Do you have an air filter just in case those things happen? You want to be not only proactive, but you don't want to always be reactive, because if you're always reactive, you'll live a very stressful life. So let's move forward, shall we? So to make an impact, you must also stretch. Now, I'm not talking about yoga, but yoga is great, because I can tell you right now, if you ever had a pulled hamstring, I played basketball. I was normally a point guard, so on and so forth when I played. However, I've pulled my hamstring before. I pulled it when I tried to play soccer, and the only time I ever played center was in high school, very briefly. I started off as a forward. I was also on the wrestling team. My wrestling coach told the soccer coach that I could run and I had endurance. Then they put me to mid or center, and I had to play offense and defense, meaning I was running for that whole period of time. And it's the most frustrating thing when you're on one side and then they kick the ball to the other side, and now you have to go back to where you were. And it's like, this sucks, right? It's like running suicides on a basketball court, right? You just keep going back and forth, and you're like, please, can I just take a break? So on and so forth, right? But what I also mean is to stretch your mind and body. They talk about protecting the delta, right? the downside, whatever the case may be. The Greek alphabet, it's a triangle, a delta, right? Or if you're into Harry Potter, you have the triangle or the symbol of the Deathly Hallows. You have the triangle, which is the delta, protect the downside, so on and so forth. The center line principle, the wand that was in the middle, so on and so forth. And then, of course, everything that's around it, which would be the circle that's inside, right? So think about it for a second, right? Then practice taking an impact, right? Practice going out and testing stuff and getting that negative feedback. Oh, F you, blah, 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 and just stand there and take it. Stand there and take it. It's really hard for people, to not take it, right? And one of the things they train, well, I don't know about other branches. I know in the Army, although they're large and they have a lot of numbers, there's specialized units within the Army. So you have your infantry, so on and so forth, but they train Marines differently, et cetera, because normally they send us out first anyways. And then backup normally comes with civil engineers and all that fun stuff, etc. However, we're normally like a quick reaction or a shock force, or we're the first ones in, or they call us America's 911, right? Because we got air, land, and sea, and then it breaks down. You have the Army, which is normally land, so they have the helicopters and cool stuff. You have the Navy, that kind of has some stuff, but it's normally in the water. Then you have the Air Force, that's in the air, so on and so forth. So we train for all three levels, right? Because since we're the first ones there, and well, we have nothing else better to do. You have to remember the Marines were founded in a bar. We like to fight. So that was the first thing we do, right? But you have to practice taking an impact, because if you get special duty assignment, you normally go MSG, you have to go to these embassies. And I remember a friend of mine, he went to a country where people were dying from diseases, so on and so forth. They were trying to get help from America, and they were literally taking these dead bodies that were plagued and throwing them at the embassy, and he just had to stand there. Right? People would come up and go on the embassy doors, blah, 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 this, that, and the third, or they'll yell in your face, right? Or if you go to the UK, you have the Queen's Guards and etc., right? The Royal Marines or Army or whatever, the Royal Guards or whatever, and they wear the funny hats and they don't move, etc., and people come up and they point at them and everything else. Practice taking an impact. If you're going into martial arts, practice getting hit. The moment you are able to understand that you are going to get hit, the target will shoot back, right? The punching bag will eventually be a human being and they will swing back, right? You have to remember, you don't know how hard they hit, right? You don't know everything that they have. You may have information on the tools and stuff that they know, etc., but you don't know the full capability, right? Practice taking the impact so when you do get hit, you're better prepared and you don't react in a weird way. Anticipate the punch, as I like to say. Moving forward, making an impact, train, right? Train hard, right? I remember one time I got in trouble, and let's just say I punched a stainless steel refrigerator and I left a nice dent in it, so on and so forth. If you ever hit stainless steel, it's hard, etc. It's very hard to dent it. I trained a lot, but I was also very angry and upset. That's a long story. Mom, I'm sorry, etc. But I was also in high school. And then, of course, I remember in the military, we would train, etc., and we would wear our flak jackets, come with like a ceramic plate with Kevlar and everything, and we use that as body gear. So I remember putting the Kevlar on, and I would put it like on a pole or on a chair, so on and so forth, and I would punch it, because if they're wearing protection, then they're not going to feel the impact. Think of it like football pads, right? Then you wonder why all these football players have fucking concussions and everything like that, and they don't know why they have brain damage and everything else. Because at the time of the impact, they had protection there so that they don't feel the impact, so that they could keep going, right? And it makes it entertaining. Now, if you took their gear off and turned it into rugby, right, then they'll be clashing, so on and so forth, like bare knuckle boxing, right? When the UFC first started, they didn't have all this safety equipment and everything like that. These were actual fighters that came, you had, who was it? Frank Shamrock, old school champion, so on and so forth, always a G. Then you got, who else? The Gracie's jiu-jitsu, so on and so forth, right? I remember one dude caught this dude in a crucifix and just started elbowing him on the side of the head in the temple, knocked him out very quickly, so on and so forth, right? So practice taking and making an impact, right? And when the time comes, be ready to release it. Remember, Meek does not mean weak. This was from Dr. Jordan Peterson, but it's said in other places, right? Be humble, as Kendrick Lamar says, right? So remember that. If you don't train yourself, remember your mind is your weapon. Your mind can also be a tool. Your mind can help you get out of the matrix, as they like to say nowadays, right? But if you don't use it, if you don't apply it, if you live in fear and you don't see and go out at night and wonder and look up at the sky and ask questions, how the hell are you going to learn anything? Or do you want to live in a box? Do you want to live in a box, right? Watching TV and whatever the media tells you and believing that without going to see it for yourself, right? You remember the political race. Kamala said we had nobody overseas. And then TikTok videos, I had people messaging me and they're like, what the hell are we doing here then? And they're overseas. You can't believe everything you see, right? Unless you see it for yourself, right? Now, moving forward. A weapon must be understood. So if you ever seen The Mask of Zorro, right, with Antonio Banderas, I think I've said this before, but it's very easy, right? And I remember somebody I was trying to train, so on and so forth. They're like, that's why I need a gun. I said, whoa, 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 whoa. Do you know how to fight? No. Do you know how to use it? No. Okay, we're going to start with the basics. And in the movie The Mask of Zorro, where Anthony Hopkins, the original Zorro, is handing off, the baton, he goes, pick up the sword, etc. He picks up the sword, he's swinging it around. He goes, okay, I'm ready. And he comes in, and because he was untrained, he smacks the sword right out of his hand. And then, of course, during that scene, and you can look it up on YouTube or whatever, it goes slow. And they start fighting, right? The sword fight, right? Quick, quick, slow. Quick, quick, slow. Quick, quick, slow. Same thing in things like Kali. You have your sticks, right? Quick, quick, slow. Quick, quick, slow. Right? And then eventually you get speed over time because of muscle memory and things like that. But in that part, I remember him asking him, he goes, do you know how to use that thing? He goes, yeah, the pointy end goes into the other person. And I thought of that and I used it when I was doing gun defense, right? I would ask people, do you know how to use a gun? Yeah, I point and shoot and I pull the trigger. Right. But the only dangerous part of a gun is the hole in the center. If you're not standing in front of the hole, the bullet can't hit you. Because if I'm pointing this way and the person's over here, right? If I'm pointing this way and the person's standing over here, I can't hit them. I would have to reposition, right? And put the weapon in front of the target, right? So remember, a weapon must be understood, right? Use a staff. Do you know how to use a staff? Right? Do you know how to use a broom like a staff? Do you know how to use your steering wheel to do the chi sao drills, sticky hand drills, right? Do you know how to maneuver on the dance floor because you went to dance class so your footwork's on point? Did you take a creative writing course online or at a college so that you can use your words more elegantly and sound more intelligent? You have to remember this, ladies and gentlemen. This is an old saying. Presentation is 9/10 of the law. So if you look a certain way, you're going to be judged a certain way because people still judge a book, i.e. you, by its cover. So if it walks like a duck and quacks like one, guess what, right? Even if you are trying to fake the front, if you don't understand what you're saying, right? And I ran into this earlier today when somebody that was telling me stuff, I said, what do you think about this? And they were like, oh, I'm new. And that was their only excuse. No, you're lying. That's a problem, right? Because once you get caught in a lie, whether you're trying to BS your way into a business negotiation or you're trying to BS your way in a relationship, did you sleep with this woman? Or did you sleep with him? Or blah, blah, blah. No. What about this picture? Or what about this video? Or what about this? Understand what it is you are dealing with before you play with fire, as I like to say. Right? Know how to use the stove before you start cooking, right? And I think cooking now is a term for, thinking and strategizing or working in your brain and writing or whatever that the kids use these days, right? Moving forward, we have science can be a weapon like one's belief can be used against oneself, right? So if you're told that the monsters are in the dark, so on and so forth, there's stranger things over there, etc., and you never explore and you get told these stories, then you'll feel fear once those things start to occur. If you never question because you're living in a box, right? If you never question to go outside of the box and investigate, right? You're prepared yourself, you got your Superman uniform on or your Batman cape, or you put your, you got the stones of destiny or whatever the hell it's called, the infinity stones, and you feel powerful and you're ready to go out there into the world, just like looking at a book without fully understanding what's in it, right? If you're just told, oh yeah, no, that's a bad book, it sucks. You don't know. You never read it. I remember my sister got into the whole Harry Potter thing, and I tried to get her to read a book called The Immortal Life of Nicholas Flamel, which is part fact and part fiction. If you go online, you can look up who Nicholas Flamel was. And apparently to this day, you can travel to Paris and see his bookstore and the library and everything else that was associated to him. He was a real life person. And then they bring in all these other people within the book, William Shakespeare and etc. John D. Not John D. Rockefeller, but John D. Machiavelli. If you listen to Tupac, he says Machiavelli a lot, right? He also wrote a book called The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. It was a real person, right? And then, of course, later as Harry Potter, the series went on, they introduced Nicholas Flamel, so on and so forth, with Dumbledore and so on and so forth. And guess what? That's when my sister was like, hey, that guy you were telling me about, he was in Harry Potter. And I was like, really? Who would have thunk? Who? I said, he was a real person. She goes, it's a movie, Michael. It can't be real. I said, Google it. And then she Googled it and she goes, I don't know if this is real or not. I said, what did Google say? Well, it says that he was real. Okay, what did the book say? Oh, well, it says that he was, well, was he real or was he not? Think about it. So remember, if you are always listening to what other people are saying without questioning properly and understanding, then you'll never know. And the only way to get a better answer is to ask a better question. Same thing when you're using AI to fix whatever problems you have in your life, right? Make yourself better. Teach yourself something, right? You have free teachers with AI now. Think about that. Tell it to become a math teacher or a math tutor or an English professor, so on and so forth. Teach you about poetry. Teach you about humanities. Teach you about history, so on and so forth, right? Question it, right? And then work with other people that are doing the same as you to make, a group, a unit, a crew, or whatever, and maybe you'll change the fucking world. Moving forward. If you study something, make sure you read and understand most of it. Now, using the analogy of The Immortal Life of Nicholas Flamel and Harry Potter, right? Or whatever books you want to use, Treasure Island, Moby Dick, whatever, there's always a lesson to be taught within that thing, right? There's always good, evil, bad, right, wrong, so on and so forth, etc. Remember, Aladdin was a thief, but he wasn't a thief that was greedy, right? He stole because he needed food for him and Abu, right? They still lived like bums, right? If Aladdin was alive today, he'd probably live in his fucking car or sleep at a bus stop, whatever the case may be, and he might steal from Walmart or whatever, or Food Lion or Key Food or Met Food or whatever, right? Because he needs to feed himself, etc. He has no money, he had no access, nobody would hire him, so on and so forth. So you have to ask the question, even if you're in law enforcement, why are they doing that thing, right? Without going into judgment. Are they doing it because they're feeding somebody? Or are they doing it because they're greedy, so on and so forth, and be shady? What about the big companies that got bailed out, right? Because you have to remember that money came from somewhere, and it's not like these banks just got their money from nowhere. They have to go to the International Monetary Fund, right? The World Bank, etc., and ask for a business loan, which is probably why the United States is in so much debt, etc. And then that money gets pushed onto the big corporations, and the reason why, I'm guessing, is because they hired and employed a lot of people, but guess what? They only had but so much money for a certain amount of people. That's why small businesses took a hit or went out of business. They weren't educated on IMF. They weren't educated on business loans, using the SBA, using leverage, going to investors, or working and selling their business to somebody if they didn't have a successor, so on and so forth. Not only to take the stress off them, but to put some as they say, shekels in their pocket, as they say. Right? So now you can do that. Moving forward, if you practice martial arts, make sure you train. An untrained fighter will not win against a trained fighter, true or false. Same thing goes with everything. If you are into rap, hip hop, dancing, culture, art. Make sure you are at least well trained. You don't have to be the best in the room, but you better be damn sure you should be able to carry your own weight. And I use this analogy, going to the gym, right? In case of an emergency, right? God forbid, everyone should be able to at least squat or pick up their weight at least 1 or 2 times, right? Why do I say this? What happens if your house is on fire, right? And you have to get things out of the house, including kids or whatever. They weigh a certain amount, right? The average person weighs anywhere between 150 to about 185 pounds. If you weigh more than that, awesome, so on and so forth. But if I'm 185 pounds and I can't pick up this 200-pound person to bring them outside to safety, or to bring them to somewhere that's safe, and then go back inside and get the cat and the dog and everything else like that, I'm useless. And that's exactly what you'll be, not only in a fight situation, but in the world as well as in business and in life. Right? You're only as strong as your weakest link. So make yourself stronger and stand together. Remember, united we stand, divided we fall. So stop thinking as an individual and work as a group. Going forward, don't get ready, stay ready. We already covered that, right? Why? In case of an emergency, you should be able to, get things done, right? Be the man or the woman of the household or whatever. Be the responsible son or daughter, etc. Moving forward, right? Now, when it comes to things like, and remember, we're still in art and we're going to be going into science soon, but when it comes to things like this, I want to, bring some understanding, right? So people will say, what are angels and what are demons, right? And what are germs? The Germans. No. So angels would be a term utilized if you look up the vocabulary for either, depending on the institution or the education or whatever. In business, they have angel investors, right? These are investors. They don't ask for anything in return. They'll give you money, etc., but you have to have an idea, etc., so on and so forth. If you're in certain situations, you may have angels, good people, right? Or highly intelligent people, angels, that are doing good for others, i.e. identified as angels, so on and so forth. You ever heard somebody say, oh, he's my angel, or she's my angel, or this, that, and the third, or girl, you're my angel, you're my dog, so on and so forth, right? But why are they saying it that way? He's not saying, girl, you're my demon, my awesome. It doesn't sound right, nor does the connotation fit, right? Demon is just slang for something that's doing bad by others, or like the thief that's feeding on greed versus trying to feed his family, right? There's a big distinction there, right? So you have to understand the terminology. And the only reason I tap on this is because people, especially when I moved down to the South, they started using these words, this terminology. In New York, we'll just say F you to your face. Down here, they'll go, oh, bless your heart, trying to sound sweet and Southern and hospitality, but really they kill you with kindness, and they'll let you die in the street, catch cancer, and they'll look the other way, or whatever the case may be, and the freaking hospitals are even in on it. So, I mean, think about it. If a doctor knows you're uneducated, they could come out and say they're a dick doctor, say they're a proctologist, but it's really a urologist. And if you're uneducated, you're not going to know the difference. So who cares? You're going to take the pills. You're going to do as they say, like a good little boy or girl, and behave because they know better, right? No. Question it now. You have the power to do so. It's right in your hand. It's called a phone. Download ChatGPT's app, right? Moving forward, hide your intentions / emotions, right? So actors are very good at manipulating their facial features and making you feel with their voice and their tonality and their pitch when they're delivering communication to one another on screen, right? So you're able to pick up on their emotions that they're trying to display. Now, reverse that, right? Be humble. Don't show anger, show understanding, right? Don't show too much stuff because you want to save just a little bit in case somebody's being sneaky, right? In martial arts, there's a saying, I could show you martial arts. I taught you what you knew, or what you know doesn't mean I taught you everything that I know, right? And I've heard martial arts instructors say this all the time. And the reason why is because during the tests of time, the longevity of their life, they have more at bats, they have more experiences. It's the same thing between the difference between boys and girls. Girls normally get more at bats when it comes to dating because, well, there's a bunch of cocky, confident guys that are willing to ask them out and they're willing to test the waters, etc. So they get more at bats. And I know the topic of body count and all this, but if you were to reverse the roles, etc., it would be the same thing, right? Guys get more at bats at sports, so on and so forth. Okay, get paid higher. They're more entertaining, so on and so forth. They get a bigger paycheck and they get to do all the fun stuff, etc. Same thing anywhere else, right? If you come from a privileged family or you have money or whatever the case, the roles are reversed, right? So it doesn't matter male, female, whatever. I was just using that to depict something, right? So don't show anger, show understanding, right? Question it. How did you get there? What did you do? And then try it for yourself, right? Same thing in martial arts. How did you do that? And you see the kids always making the noises, right? And it's like, oh, well, you do it like this, not like that. Or you hold it like this, like Zorro. You hold the sword this way, not that way. You attack this way, not that way. Use your words like this, not like this. So on and so forth, unless it's a dangerous situation, so on and so forth, right? Or you're trying to educate, right? Or if it's a life or death matter, right? And then you have to think, how do I say this? Think Africa and Amazon, right? I tried to tell this to somebody and they were trying to get smart with me and I was like, oh, you must have studied agriculture. And she goes, no, I said, you should study botany. And she goes, what are you talking about? I said, agriculture is different than botany. Why is that? Well, botany, you need to know if they throw you into a jungle or an Amazon, right? This is where biology comes from, right? When you study the plants, how do you know what's poison ivy, what's poison oak, what can you eat, what's a thistle, so on and so forth, etc. What's going to keep you alive, what's not? Learn from nature, right? It takes a village to raise a child, right? Think Africa's proverb, right? So on and so forth. And remember, when people say they're the king of the jungle, there are no lions in the jungle, but there are gorillas. And if you've seen Denzel Washington's movie where he says, King Kong ain't got nothing on me, he ended up dead. Remember that. The streets turned on him real quick, homeboy. Why? Because he got cocky, he got arrogant, he got prideful, etc. He thought he had all these connections, so nobody could touch me. One thing I learned in the military is everybody could be found and anybody could get touched. Look at what's happening now overseas, right? Look at what's happening between UK and Russia. Look at what happened, with other stuff, right? Whether it's COVID or whatever, right? COVID started in one location and made it all the way over here. How did that happen? Aren't you untouchable? You can't catch a cold? You're going to cough? Right? Think about it. Let's move forward. So the mind and body can be trained and strengthened. Now, I don't have to go into much depth here, but you can go to the gym just like you can go out into nature, expose yourself to pollen, develop a tolerance for the pollen. This is why people normally would take honey, because the bees in the area would cultivate the pollen from everything, bring it back to the hive, make honey from it. And then if you use that, because honey is actually very good for you, it has antioxidants and everything and anti-inflammatory properties, but it also increases your immune system, right? So it also gets you used to your environment. So if you want that, take a spoonful of honey each day. You don't have to take my word of advice. Go Google it for yourself or ask ChatGPT, right? But you could start training yourself, right? Develop yourself, develop your body, etc. If you have asthma, go swimming, go running. Force yourself to do something than staying stuck because somebody said you were, right? They told me I was never going to lift weights again when I got my shoulder surgery, right? You're probably never going to do martial arts again. You're probably never going to lift weights the same way. And I said, yeah, they told Bruce Lee the same thing, that he wasn't going to be able to walk. And guess what? He figured it out. And if he could do it, I can do it. Anything you can do, I can do better. Whatever the case may be, right? You remember that jingle, right? So remember that, right? And then, of course, with your brain, right? Educate your brain. You can do that. It's not hard. Test yourself. play games, right? There's you got those memory games where you have the pictures on the cards and you flip the cards over, you shuffle them around, and you kind of remember. Now people don't even remember a damn 7-digit phone number. When back in the day, you used to be able to remember all these phone numbers, etc., right? Now everything's saved into your phone. You don't have to remember the phone number. So then when somebody says, yo, what's so-and-so's phone number? You're like, I don't know. Where's my phone? Think about it. If technology died, if an EMP, think Matrix, right? When they launched the EMP and the robots and everything, AI shuts down, so on and so forth, or your calculator breaks during math class, what's gonna happen? What are you gonna do? Think about it. What are you gonna do? Can you survive? Right? So, how to train the mind? Get out of your comfort zone. Go to new places, meet new people, new personalities. Remember, there's a lot of people that emulate what they see on TV, and they also emulate their environment. So move to a different state, move to a different country. I guarantee you, if you go to Africa, they don't act the same way. I know, because I have people and friends from Africa that ask me, why do people act like this here? I have people from South America. They're like, why do the Spanish people act this way? Why do they speak Spanish that way? I had my Spanish teacher that was from freaking Spain, and he goes, oh, you're not speaking Spanish correctly. And I said, but I learned Spanish because I'm Puerto Rican and Dominican, and I grew up around Spanish people, etc. Then I went to California, got around the Mexican culture, and their Spanish was completely different. So their lingo, their terminology, their cultures, the way they behave, so on and so forth, etc. You know, I got friends from Ireland, from Scotland, so on and so forth. They know their ethnicity. I have friends that are here, and I'm like, so what are you? And they're like, oh, I'm white. Okay, but what are you? I'm American. Okay. Well, are you Scottish? Are you Irish? Because everybody's an immigrant. So what are you? And they don't know. And if you don't know, how can you appreciate life? Why even have St. Patty's Day, right? When everybody wants to be, Irish that day, right? Without appreciating the culture. Or why be into shows like Supernatural without studying Celtic tradition and, magic and whatever that case may be, and studying that. Or looking at different videos online and looking at stuff and questioning the world and things around you. Develop a curious mind. I remember I saw sadness in a man's face, and he came up to me and said, how old are you? And I told him my age. He goes, nothing in this world should shock you or amaze you anymore. And I took that and I saw the pain, and it was like life got sucked out of his body, right? And then I performed a magic effect where afterwards he came up to me, he goes, I know why you do magic now, and I'm starting to question life again. Thank you. And that was the best feeling ever, right? Because there was a guy that was literally just sitting there, he had fun times, etc. He was cool, etc. But I saw, more and more drinking. I saw other people doing the same thing. And so I would do this and get them out of that funk, break the pattern, as they say, right? And develop new ones, make them go, how did you do that? Like, I ain't gonna tell you, but you gotta find out for yourself. And then come back to me when you figure something out, show me a part of it, and then maybe I'll tell you some more stuff. And I'm like, all right, I'll go try it, so on and so forth. It's like riding a bike. How did you ride that bike, right? Well, here, I'll show you how to do it. Get on the bike, I'll hold the seat, and I'll push, so on and so forth. And then little by little, you do it. Next thing you know, you come back, you're doing wheelies on a motorcycle, so on and so forth, etc. Check out what I could do. I could do an endo, you're on the front wheel, etc. Right? And it's a happy feeling. It makes you feel young again. And you have to remember, the reason people age is not just because of, the environment and your cells and all this, but their mind tells them that they're old. And age is a mindset. If you think you're old, you're old. If you think you're young, you're young. You get to have both, as they say. Moving forward. So experience new things, right? I said experience places, people, personalities, experience new species, right? Humans, animals, so on and so forth, etc. Yes, it's one thing to go to the zoo, but have you gone to the forest and seen a black bear right in front of you? I have, and it scared the crap out of me. Why? Because animals do not understand rules of engagement. They don't communicate like us, so on and so forth. Go swimming and have a shark come right up next to you and see what happens. Are you big and bad like the shark? Probably not, because you're in its domain, right? Or when you're in the forest and a grizzly bear pops out, what are you going to do? Or if you're in the jungle and you see a gorilla, or if you're in the Sahara and you see a tiger or a cheetah or a lion or a hyena, so on and so forth, right? Experience that, right? It'll open your mind to so much more, right? But if you only stay in your box, in your house, which is shaped like a box, looking on your phone, which is shaped like a rectangular box, or looking at your TV, etc., then you're not going to get very far. You can live vicariously through the stories one tells, but however, if you don't experience life for yourself, you'll never live. Truly. You may have thought you lived. Oh, I saw this show again. Oh, they just did this remake. Oh, that movie sucks. And you just end up in this negativity, this negative pattern. Oh, this is old. I haven't heard this before. We know this already. Blah, blah, blah. Well, if you know it, why the fuck haven't you tried something to change it? Why haven't you had to, why didn't you remix it? Why didn't you change something? Why didn't you create your own thing, right? But you know everything, right? Because you saw it before. I wonder how. I wonder how. Remember, people act cocky and confident when they think they have leverage on their side, but when that leverage is only proven to be false because they need to have control and power over your mind. Now you look at that leverage and control as a leash on a dog. Remember that. So, recapping real quick, how to train the body. Take an impact, make an impact, redirect the impact, and then avoid impact, right? So those four, I'll say it real quick, so on and so forth, because I know this is kind of a long video here. How to train the body. Take an impact, make an impact, redirect the impact, and avoid the impact. Hold on one second. I got to do a test here. Perfect. Making sure the battery is still working. So moving forward, we only got a couple more points. Yeah, we got 1, 2, and 3 points left. So question how and why this helps foresight, right? Remember, knowledge is not useful if you don't use it or if it's not applied. Why? Because it will never turn into wisdom. If you never pass down what you learned to your children, they won't look at you as wise. They will just see you as knowledgeable. So educate them. Same thing goes with the people around you, right? And the only way you gain wisdom is if you pass on that knowledge, and then that knowledge proves to be true over and over again. Then when you become a grandparent, talk to the parent that's talking to the child. This is how you gain insight. You'll be able to see further, right? And you'll be able to have foresight, as they say, right? You'll be able to anticipate more because of your experiences and the longevity over time, that, the at-bats that you had. Then from there, you want to avoid conflict. Remember, don't go with anger, go with understanding, right? You don't know everything. Remember that. And the more I learn, the more, I even said this on the phone, when I was studying the encyclopedia, no, not Britannica, Microsoft's encyclopedia, and studying all these creative geniuses, the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know, and it made me want to not only learn more, but do more, right? And then you don't know what the other person actually knows unless you're listening into them, like a child would listen around the corner, or like the police would hijack a phone, or whatever the case may be, because they need to know everything, right? Because they don't feel safe. Remember, we are all grown children looking for someone to guide us. Why do you think we have a president? He's not the only one that makes the decisions or the choices, right? Every country, they have the monarchy, the king and queen, so on and so forth. They have the emperor, whatever the case may be. They all need someone to look up to. In a household, you have the mother and father, right? You need someone to look up to. But then when you're at an adult, who do you look up to, right? So we're all grown children looking for someone to guide us. Remember that. And then don't show off all the time, right? Don't always have to be the best thing in the room. Let others shine as well, right? Just because you're Jay-Z doesn't mean you can't hang out with an upcoming artist. Just because you're Eminem doesn't mean you can't bring somebody else up, or 50 Cent, or Dr. Dre, so on and so forth, etc., right? Allow others to shine because they have something that's different that made them unique enough to stand out, not only to you, but you may have thought of them as a threat, which means that they are sharing something that you probably never heard before, or you have heard before, but has a different creative twist to it, right? Now, death brings happiness to no one, right? And this is where I'm going to wrap up here, because I talked about how you can't fight with a dull weapon. But remember, death brings happiness to no one, right? And what I mean by that, yeah, you may grow up in the street, you may grew up in the military, you may grew up in somewhere else, so on and so forth. But whatever side is done, death is silent, and it doesn't speak back. And it doesn't bring happiness or joy. It may bring peace to whomever is dead, so they don't have to deal with all the other bullshit that's going on. Taxes, inflation, stress, life, bills, no job, yes job, don't know if they're firing people today or tomorrow, whatever, if we're going to war or not, this, that, all the chaos, etc. So it brings peace, but it brings happiness to no one. Remember that. So know your limits, know how to control them, just like your emotions and anger. Never go too far, because you can never come back from neither, and neither can they. And I'll say that last part again. Never go too far, because you and them can neither come back. Remember that. What's they saying? YOLO, you only live once, as they say. So make the most of the time you have, because if you don't, someone else will. And that is the end of this lesson. I hope you guys got a lot of this, information. I know it's hard to keep up with me, because I, go onto different tangents, and, I try to, if you study, Neil Strauss's mystery method, he talks about conversation and breaking them off into different stories, right? So I could leave part of it here and then go somewhere else, and then sometimes come back, but then eventually wrap everything up, right? And it all makes sense in how everything comes together. So I hope you got something out of this. If you didn't, or you did, or you missed something, go ahead and rewind it. And if you think this could help somebody, please share. Till next time in the next lesson, take care. Peace. Mwah. Love you guys. Adios.